The day I found out about her infidelity was etched into my memory like a scar that would never heal. I remember the sunlight filtering through the window, casting a warm glow in our living room, a stark contrast to the chill that enveloped my heart when I saw the text messages on her phone. I had come home early from work, eager to surprise her with dinner. Instead, I stumbled upon a digital betrayal that would shatter my world. Her name was Emma, and for years she had been my rock, my confidant, and the love of my life. We had built a life together, filled with dreams and plans for the future. But in that moment, all of it felt like a mirage, a facade that crumbled under the weight of reality. The messages were explicit, filled with affection and longing, directed towards none other than a celebrity, a man whose face was plastered across every magazine and television screen. He was everything I wasn't: charming, charismatic, and most importantly, famous. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Betrayal clawed at my insides, twisting and turning until it left me gasping for breath. How could she do this to me? I had devoted myself to her, poured my heart into our marriage, and this was how she repaid my love. My mind raced through a torrent of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief, and a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy. I was not enough for her, and that realization cut deeper than any knife. In those first moments of discovery, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand answers. But instead, I found myself frozen in place, paralyzed by the weight of my emotions. I could not understand how she could choose a fleeting moment of passion with a stranger over the life we had built together. It was a betrayal that felt so profound, so personal, that I couldn't help but wonder if I had ever truly known her at all. As the days passed, the initial shock began to morph into something darker. I started to notice the looks of pity from friends and family, the way they whispered behind my back. Emma had become the talk of our social circle, and I was the husband left to pick up the pieces. Each time I heard her name, a fresh wave of anger surged through me. I was a man scorned, and I felt the urge to unleash that fury upon the world. But how? I was not a violent man. I had never been one to lash out. Instead, I began to ponder a more insidious form of revenge. I was no stranger to the power of public opinion. In an age dominated by social media, a single tweet or post could change the narrative entirely. I could manipulate the very perception of Emma, twist the story until it became unrecognizable, and turn her into a figure of scorn. The thought was intoxicating, a dark seed that planted itself in my mind and began to take root. I had been wronged, and part of me began to relish the idea of making her pay. But it wasn't just revenge. It was about reclaiming my power. I felt small and insignificant, overshadowed by the celebrity who had stolen her heart, and I wanted to turn that feeling on its head. I wanted the world to see her for what she truly was: a deceitful woman who had betrayed her husband for a fleeting moment of fame. The more I contemplated this plan, the more I felt a sense of purpose. This was not just about Emma, it was about me, about taking back control of my narrative. As I plotted my revenge, I knew I had to be careful. I needed to gather information, create a narrative that would resonate with others, and find the right platforms to amplify my message. I could already imagine the headlines: "Husband exposes cheating wife. Love is blind but not for everyone." The thought sent a shiver of excitement down my spine. I began to craft my strategy, knowing that I would need to be methodical and precise. I would not only expose her betrayal, but also ensure that the public would turn against her. The anger that had once threatened to consume me now transformed into a clear, calculated desire for vengeance. I would become the architect of her downfall, and in doing so, I would reclaim the power she had stripped away from me. The plan began to take shape in my mind, and with each passing day, my resolve strengthened. I would not be a victim. I would be the force that brought her to her knees. The emotional turmoil that had once threatened to drown me now fueled my determination. I was ready to unleash my revenge upon the world, and as I prepared to set my plan in motion, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. As the days turned into weeks, my mind became a whirlwind of thoughts, strategies, and the intoxicating scent of revenge. I spent countless hours obsessively scrolling through social media, familiarizing myself with the landscape of influencers, bloggers, and online communities where I could plant the seeds of my narrative. I needed to understand the dynamics of public opinion. What made people rally behind a cause? What stories captured their hearts? And more importantly, what stories ignited their outrage? The more I delved into this world, the more I realized that people craved drama. They thrived on scandal and betrayal, and I had the perfect story to tell. I envisioned it, a husband betrayed by his wife for a celebrity, the ultimate betrayal of love and trust. I could already hear the gasps of disbelief, the murmurs of sympathy for me, and the disdain directed at her. It was a narrative that would write itself, and I was determined to be its author. But first, I needed evidence. I had to gather the pieces of the puzzle that would support my story, the indisputable facts that would leave no room for doubt. I spent hours going through Emma's social media accounts, analyzing her interactions, her likes, and her comments. I found photos of her with the celebrity, moments that seemed harmless at first but now felt like daggers to my heart. I saved screenshots of their exchanges, subtle flirtations that had been hidden in plain sight. I even began to track her whereabouts, documenting her movements and the times she would go out without me. I felt like a detective, piecing together a case against her, and with each revelation my anger grew stronger. I was no longer just a man scorned. I was a man on a mission. The narrative was forming in my mind, and I was ready to take action. I decided to create a separate social media account, one that would allow me to operate in the shadows. It would be my platform to spread the truth, my truth. I chose a name that was innocuous enough to avoid suspicion, something that wouldn't draw attention. I began to follow influencers who thrived on gossip and scandal, engaging with their content to establish credibility. Slowly, I built a network of connections that would help amplify my message when the time came. The more I engaged with this online community, the more I understood how to manipulate their emotions. I learned how to frame my narrative in a way that would resonate with them. I crafted posts that would elicit sympathy for my situation, carefully choosing my words to paint Emma as the villain in this story. I would write about my heartbreak, the sleepless nights spent wondering why she had chosen someone else over me. I would share snippets of her betrayal, each piece designed to elicit outrage and pity in equal measure. But it wasn't just about crafting a narrative. I needed to ensure it spread like wildfire. I began to look for key influencers who could help me amplify my message. I identified a few popular blogs and social media accounts that thrived on relationship drama. I reached out to them, posing as a distraught husband seeking advice, subtly dropping hints about my situation. The more I engaged with them, the more I felt the momentum building. As I plotted my revenge, I couldn't shake the feeling of exhilaration coursing through me. It was as if I had stepped into a new persona, one that was no longer the victim but the orchestrator of my own fate. I reveled in the thought of Emma's downfall, how her once idyllic life would crumble before her eyes, all because of the choices she had made. Yet, amidst the thrill of planning, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind. It whispered doubts, questions about whether I was crossing a line I could never uncross. I pushed those thoughts aside, convincing myself that she deserved this. After all, she had chosen betrayal over loyalty, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. With my plan taking shape, I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer just a husband betrayed. I was a man reclaiming his narrative, ready to expose the truth and ensure that the world knew the real Emma. The emotional turmoil that had once threatened to consume me now fueled my determination. I was ready to unleash my revenge upon the world. And with that, I took a deep breath, ready to step into the next phase of my plan. I would use every tool at my disposal to ensure that my story was heard, that Emma would be transformed from a beloved wife into a figure of scorn. The stage was set, and soon, the world would know the truth. With each passing day, my plan grew increasingly intricate, like a web meticulously woven to ensnare its prey. I found myself immersed in a world of digital manipulation, using the tools of social media to craft a narrative that would resonate with the masses. I was no longer just a man suffering from heartbreak. I was a puppeteer, pulling the strings of public opinion to ensure that Emma would face the consequences of her actions. I started by meticulously documenting every piece of evidence I had gathered against her. I created a timeline of events, highlighting the moments when she had lied to me, the times she had snuck away under the guise of work commitments. I knew I had to present a compelling case, one that would evoke sympathy for me and outrage towards her. The more I organized my thoughts, the more I could see the story taking shape. I drafted a series of posts that would serve as the foundation for my narrative. Each post was designed to be relatable, drawing on universal themes of betrayal, heartbreak, and the struggle to move on. I wrote about the love I had for Emma, painting our marriage as a beautiful story that had been marred by her choice to sleep with a celebrity. I included snippets of our life together, the dreams we had shared, and the loyalty I had shown. These posts would humanize me, making it easy for others to empathize with my plight. But I knew that storytelling alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to create a buzz, a sense of urgency around my narrative. So I began to engage with various online communities, seeking out those who thrived on drama and gossip. I found forums dedicated to relationship advice, and I crafted my persona as a heartbroken husband seeking solace. In these spaces, I would drop hints about Emma's betrayal, carefully weaving my story into the fabric of their discussions. I also identified key influencers, those whose voices carried weight in the digital landscape. I reached out to them, posing as someone desperate for help. I shared my story in private messages, ensuring that I left them wanting more. I hinted at the celebrity involved, knowing that the mere mention of his name would pique their interest. I was careful to maintain a tone of vulnerability, portraying myself as a man who had been wronged, rather than someone seeking revenge. As I began to gain traction, I felt a rush of exhilaration. My posts were shared, my story was discussed, and slowly but surely, the narrative I had crafted was taking hold. People began to rally around me, offering support and sympathy. I was no longer alone in my suffering. I had a community of strangers who understood my pain and were willing to share it with the world. But with each like, each comment of support, I felt an internal conflict brewing. I was playing a dangerous game, one that could spiral out of control. I had started this journey seeking revenge, but now I was beginning to relish the attention. The power of public opinion was intoxicating, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of superiority as I watched Emma's reputation begin to tarnish. I decided to take things a step further. I created a new post that would serve as the catalyst for my plan. I shared a heartfelt message about betrayal, accompanied by a photo of Emma and me from happier times, juxtaposed with a recent image of her laughing with the celebrity. The contrast was stark, and I knew it would resonate with others. I wrote about the pain of seeing her with someone else, the betrayal that cut deep. I ended the post with a powerful question. How could she choose a fleeting moment of fame over a love that was real? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in, each one echoing sentiments of outrage and disbelief. People were quick to side with me, offering their condolences and anger towards Emma. I watched in awe as my plan unfolded, the narrative I had crafted gaining momentum and becoming a living, breathing entity of its own. It was exhilarating, but it was also deeply unsettling. I could feel the weight of my actions beginning to settle on my shoulders. I had initiated a whirlwind of public opinion, and I was no longer in control. The more attention my story garnered, the more I realized the potential. Consequences. I was turning Emma into a pariah, a woman loathed by the very people who once adored her. But as the likes and comments continued to pour in, I pushed those feelings aside. I was on a mission, and I would not allow guilt to cloud my judgment. Emma had made her choice, and now it was time for her to face the repercussions. With each passing day, I became more entrenched in my role as the wronged husband. I kept feeding the narrative, sharing snippets of our life together, interspersed with my reflections on her betrayal. I created fake accounts to amplify my message, posting under different names to ensure that the outrage grew. The more I invested in this story, the more I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim. I was a force to be reckoned with, a man determined to reclaim his power and expose the truth. And as I prepared to take my plan to the next level, I could already envision the fallout. Emma would be the most hated woman on the internet, and I would be the one who had orchestrated it all. As the narrative I had crafted continued to gain traction, I felt an unsettling mix of exhilaration and anxiety. The posts I had shared were being liked, shared, and discussed in ways I had never anticipated. I watched as Emma's name began to trend, not in the way she had always dreamed, but as a cautionary tale, a woman who had thrown away a devoted husband for a moment of fleeting fame. With each passing day, I committed myself more deeply to my plan. I knew I had to escalate my efforts to ensure that the momentum didn't wane. I began to leak information, carefully curated snippets of our life together that would paint her in a negative light. I shared stories of her past indiscretions, moments that had once seemed trivial but now felt like essential evidence of her character. I crafted posts that highlighted her hypocrisy, the way she had once lectured friends about fidelity while engaging in her betrayal. The emotional toll of my actions was beginning to surface. I found myself in a constant state of conflict, torn between the thrill of revenge and the guilt that lingered in the back of my mind. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from our marriage, the laughter, the intimacy, the love that had once defined us. But then I would remember the betrayal, the way she had shattered my trust, and I would push those thoughts away. I was doing this for a reason. I was reclaiming my power. To further amplify my narrative, I decided to leverage the power of influencers. I reached out to a few popular accounts that specialized in celebrity gossip and relationship drama. I crafted a story that would catch their attention, an emotional tale of a husband wronged by his wife's infidelity with a celebrity. I included the evidence I had gathered, carefully curating the details to evoke sympathy and outrage. When I hit send on those messages, it felt like I was lighting a fuse. I knew that if they bought into my story, it would spread like wildfire. A few days later, I received a response from one of the influencers, expressing interest in my story. They wanted to feature it on their blog, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized my plan was working. The blog post went live, and within hours it exploded. Comments flooded in, each one echoing outrage towards Emma. People were eager to share their own stories of betrayal, drawing parallels between their experiences and mine. I watched in awe as my narrative took on a life of its own, morphing into a viral sensation that had everyone talking. But as the attention grew, so did the consequences. I started to see Emma's reaction unfold in real time. Friends began to reach out to her, expressing their shock and concern. I watched as her social media accounts became battlegrounds, filled with hostile comments from strangers who had taken my side. The woman who had once been the center of attention was now the target of online vitriol, and I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction at the chaos I had unleashed. Yet with each new comment, I felt a pang of guilt. I had crossed a line, and the implications of my actions were starting to weigh heavily on me. I could sense Emma's despair through the screen, her heartache becoming palpable as she faced the backlash. But then I would remind myself of what she had done, how she had betrayed the love we had built. It was a cycle of justification that I could seem to break free from. The emotional toll of my revenge began to manifest in other ways. I found myself withdrawing from friends and family, consumed by this new identity I had created. I was no longer the husband who had been wronged. I was the architect of Emma's downfall. I would scroll through the comments on her posts, reveling in the outrage, but each like and share also felt like a dagger to my heart. I was destroying someone I had once loved, and the weight of that knowledge was suffocating. As the days turned into weeks, the public backlash against Emma intensified. She became a trending topic, the subject of memes and jokes that mocked her betrayal. I had succeeded in turning her into the most hated woman on the internet, but at what cost? Each new post about her felt like a betrayal of my own humanity. I was losing myself in this quest for revenge, and I could feel the darkness creeping in. In quiet moments, I would question whether I had gone too far. Was this really justice, or was I simply indulging in a twisted fantasy fueled by my pain? I had started this journey seeking to reclaim my power, but now I was left feeling hollow, my heart heavy with the weight of my actions. I had become a puppet master, pulling the strings of public opinion, but I was also the one who had become ensnared in my own web. Despite these conflicting feelings, I pressed on. I was in too deep to turn back now. I had spent weeks building this narrative, and I couldn't let it unravel. I needed to see it through to the end. I would continue to expose Emma for who she truly was, a woman who had chosen betrayal over loyalty. I would ensure that she faced the consequences of her actions, no matter how much it hurt me in the process. As I prepared for the next phase of my plan, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I would not let guilt or doubt deter me. I was the wronged husband, and I was going to make sure the world knew it. Emma would be forced to reckon with the reality of what she had done, and I would be the one to ensure that she never forgot it. The crescendo of my revenge reached its peak as I continued to feed the narrative I had created. Emma's name had become synonymous with betrayal, and she was now the subject of countless discussions online. Every time I opened my social media accounts, I was met with a barrage of comments that vilified her. Some were filled with righteous anger, others were cruel and mocking. I had successfully turned her into a public enemy, and yet, in the depths of my heart, I felt a growing unease. The first signs of her unraveling became evident when I noticed the cracks in her facade. Friends who had once been supportive began to distance themselves. Messages of concern turned into whispers of judgment. I watched her social media accounts transform from vibrant showcases of her life to a battleground littered with hate. The comments section had become a toxic wasteland, filled with insults and derision. I felt a sick satisfaction each time I saw her struggle to respond to the onslaught, but alongside that satisfaction was an unsettling sense of guilt. One evening, I decided to check in on her Instagram account, the very platform where I had first discovered her betrayal. I scrolled through her posts, my heart racing as I saw the toll the public backlash had taken on her. The vibrant photos of our life together had been replaced with desperate attempts to defend herself against the waves of negativity. She had posted a heartfelt message pleading for understanding, expressing remorse for her actions. Yet the comments were relentless, people were unforgiving, and the vitriol was palpable. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. I had wanted her to suffer, to understand the pain she had inflicted upon me, but witnessing her breakdown was not as satisfying as I had imagined. I had taken things too far, and I was beginning to question whether this was truly the justice I had sought. As the backlash continued, I noticed a shift in Emma. She began to withdraw from the public eye, her once lively personality replaced by a shell of the woman I had married. She posted less frequently, her posts becoming sparse and devoid of the joy that once radiated from her. I could sense her pain through the screen, and it gnawed at me. Had I become the monster in this story? Yet I pressed on. I had invested too much time and energy into this plan to back down now. I knew I had to maintain the momentum, so I reached out to a few more influencers, providing them with the latest updates on Emma's downfall. I shared more details about her actions, framing them in a way that would keep the outrage alive. The clicks and shares were like a drug, and I was addicted to the validation that came with them. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized that the more I fed the narrative, the more hollow I felt. I was becoming trapped in a cycle of revenge that seemed to have no end. I had started this journey to reclaim my power, but instead I felt powerless. The darkness that had once fueled my actions now loomed over me, casting a shadow on my soul. One night I found myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with regret. I thought about the love I had once shared with Emma, the dreams we had built together. I remembered the laughter, the intimacy, and the moments that had made our marriage special. But those memories were now tainted by the betrayal, and I struggled to reconcile the two. I picked up my phone and opened Emma's profile once more. Her latest post was a desperate plea, a heartfelt message about the consequences of her actions and the pain she had caused. She apologized not only to me but to everyone who had supported her. The comments were brutal, but there were also a few voices of reason, people urging others to show compassion, to remember that everyone makes mistakes. Those comments struck a chord within me. I had wanted to destroy her, but now I was witnessing the very real consequences of my actions. Emma was not just a name on a screen. She was a person, a woman who had made a terrible mistake. And while I had every right to feel hurt and betrayed, I began to question whether I had the right to condemn her to a life of public scorn. In that moment of reflection, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. I had been so consumed by my desire for revenge that I had lost sight of the man I once was. I had allowed my pain to dictate my actions, leading me down a dark path that threatened to consume everything I had once held dear. It was time to reconsider my approach. I didn't want to be remembered as the man who destroyed his wife's life. I wanted to be someone who could rise above the pain and find a way to heal. I knew I couldn't undo the damage I had done, but perhaps I could stop it from getting worse. I took a deep breath and began to craft a new message, one that would acknowledge my pain but also extend a lifeline to Emma. I wanted to share my side of the story, not as a means of vengeance, but as a way to express my hurt and hopefully find some resolution. I wanted to invite others to remember that we are all human, capable of making mistakes. As I prepared to post my message, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was taking the first step towards healing, both for myself and for Emma. I couldn't erase the past, but I could choose to move forward, to reclaim my narrative without destroying hers in the process. With a shaky hand, I hit post and watched as my message went live. I knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face the consequences of my actions, no matter how difficult it might be. As my message went live, I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. The words I had chosen were not easy to write. They required me to confront my own vulnerability. I had spent weeks constructing a narrative that painted Emma as the villain, and now I was stepping back from that cliff, ready to face the consequences of my actions, not just for her but for myself. The post began with an acknowledgement of my pain. I wrote about the betrayal, the confusion, and the heartache that had consumed me. But I also spoke about forgiveness, about the importance of recognizing that we are all flawed, capable of making mistakes. I wanted to remind people that while my hurt was valid, it didn't justify the destruction I had wrought upon Emma's life. I shared my realization that revenge would not heal my wounds, it would only deepen them. I admitted that I had allowed my anger to cloud my judgment, transforming me into someone I barely recognized. As I hit post, I felt the weight of the world lift slightly off my shoulders. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. The response was immediate. Comments began pouring in, a mix of support and criticism. Some praised my honesty while others questioned my motives, wondering if this was just another ploy to shift public opinion. But I didn't care. I had taken a stand for myself, and that was enough. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift in the online discourse surrounding Emma. While some continued to express their outrage, others began to echo my sentiments about forgiveness and understanding. The tide was turning, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps we could both find a way to heal from this. I reached out to Emma privately, something I had hesitated to do for so long. I sent her a message, expressing my desire to talk, to share our feelings, and to begin to understand each other's perspectives. I didn't know if she would respond, but I felt compelled to extend that olive branch. To my surprise, she replied. Her message was tinged with sadness but also a hint of relief. We agreed to meet, and the anticipation filled me with a mix of dread and hope. Would this conversation lead to more pain, or could it be the first step towards healing? When the day arrived, I found myself standing outside a small cafe, my heart racing. I was nervous, unsure of how to approach the conversation. Would she be angry? Would she blame me for the public backlash she had faced? As I walked in, I spotted her sitting at a corner table, looking fragile yet resolute. We exchanged awkward pleasantries before diving into the conversation. I shared my feelings, the hurt I had experienced, and how it had driven me to act in ways I never thought I would. Emma listened intently, her eyes reflecting the weight of our shared history. She spoke about her own feelings of guilt and shame, about how her choices had spiraled out of control and into a public spectacle that neither of us had anticipated. As we talked, I could see the remnants of the love we had once shared flickering beneath the surface of our pain. It was a slow, painful process, but we began to understand each other's perspectives. We both acknowledged our mistakes, the ways in which we had hurt one another, and the need for healing, not just for ourselves, but for the sake of the love we had once cherished. The conversation was cathartic, a release of the pent-up emotions that had fueled my revenge. I apologized for my actions, for the way I had used social media as a weapon, and she expressed her remorse for her betrayal. It was a delicate dance of vulnerability, but as we spoke, I felt the walls we had built begin to crumble. In the weeks that followed, we continued to talk, slowly rebuilding the connection that had been severed. It was not easy, and there were moments of doubt, but we both committed to the process. I learned to let go of the anger that had once consumed me, and Emma worked on understanding her own motivations. As time passed, I saw a change in her. She began to reclaim her life, stepping back into the public eye with a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey wasn't without challenges, but she approached it with humility and grace. I watched as she used her platform to talk about her experiences, emphasizing the importance of honesty and the consequences of our choices. In a strange way, our shared experience had transformed us both. I had entered this journey seeking revenge, but what I found was a deeper understanding of love, forgiveness, and the complexities of human relationships. I realized that while betrayal could shatter trust, it could also pave the way for growth and healing. Looking back, I understood that my actions had consequences far beyond what I had initially envisioned. I had sought to destroy Emma's reputation, but in the end, I had also discovered the depths of my own character. I had faced the darkness within me and emerged on the other side, ready to embrace a new chapter in my life. As I reflected on our journey, I felt a sense of peace. Revenge had not been the answer, understanding had. And while our relationship would never be the same, it had evolved into something more profound, an alliance forged in the fires of pain, but tempered by the willingness to forgive. I had learned that we are all capable of redemption, and sometimes the greatest revenge we can take is to rise above the hurt and choose to heal. Instead, and with that realization, I closed the chapter on this dark phase of my life, ready to embrace whatever came next.